Welcome to the Kingdom of Pod. Jeff Caves here, now back again in Flower Mound, Texas. Just some explanation if anybody's wondering that I wasn't posting or texting or tweeting during the game or immediately posting a video after. My family and I went to the University of Oklahoma game against Baylor in Norman, and so that changed my schedule up. One of the reasons that I ended up moving to Texas, my wife's from here, family here, and for me to do different things, have different experiences, and that is included in that list. And after this weekend coming up, I'm going to go to USC against Colorado in the Coliseum. My wife's never seen the Coliseum for a USC football game, so we're going to experience that. So I'll be sort of shifting around some more. I'll even see a Rams game. So anyway, it's just been a great experience for us to do some different things. I've had my Fridays and Saturdays gratefully, filled with Boise State football for a long time. So having a chance to do something else has been a great thing. But let's get back to this game. That's not why you tuned here to the Kingdom of Pod here, brought to you by Bet Online. It was a 31-28 loss. We don't need to be reminded too much more about that. But I always like to go back and look at the expectations that maybe I had before this game. It has nothing to do with what the coaches may have thought, or I don't know what all of you thought. But I did think that BYU's defense was an issue. Their own media was saying it was one of the worst defenses they'd ever seen. The BYU roster in general had 42 different starters on offense and defense before that game against Boise State. Defensively, the Y was allowing 64% conversions on third down the last 4 games. Boise State only managed 40%. Defensively, they were giving up 528 yards a game, BYU's defense. Boise State only managed 324, only 100 of those on the ground with 30 rushing attempts. We'll get to more about that. The time of possession, BYU had been dominated, and Boise State had dominated teams in this area, and BSU got dominated here by BYU by 10 minutes. So a lot of things out of character that were not happening for BYU in the previous 4 weeks. It was a bruised and battered team that got an emotional lift out of playing here where they've won before. I'll get to this series that's now concluded, I think, for the perceivable future. But I thought they were motivated. They usually are. Their backs were against the wall. They didn't want to be embarrassed. Something clicked for them. They may have bought into the game plan that was put together and showing that they had opportunities on the outside on offense against the mismatched Boise State defensive backs, and then countering with that great screen game. Perhaps they all bought in. I know the offensive line for BYU bought in. They protected really, really well. I thought Hall could scramble by time, and he got great protection. Boise State, no sacks, 1 tackle for loss, only 2 quarterback hurries the entire game. And I know they did blitz at times. Sometimes they had 3 rushing and 4 rushing, and they lost to Michigan, Washington. There were some factors there that they had to react to. The level of competition certainly was better. The personnel was better, but nobody's going to cover Nakua. This kid's an NFL prospect. He's tall, he's rangy, he's out of a long line of BYU wide receivers that have that kind of talent. He's a Pac-12 kid. He was wanted nationally, and he's somebody that I'm sure the Boise State coaching staff was more than familiar with because he was at UW and transferred back to BYU, and the rest is history. We all saw what he did. I just think you're not going to stop some kids that way unless you have somebody who matches up with him one-on-one that's headed off to the NFL in a similar fashion. And I don't think Boise State's corners necessarily are as high of an NFL prospect as he is. But I looked at this series, and if it's a shame that it's over. It's been played every year since 2012. Boise State will end up winning this series 8-5. A lot of those wins coming earlier. Boise State's 2-3 against BYU the last 5 years, and I want to do some work on that particular stretch of time for Boise State football because I think it influences all of us and our thinking. But as telling as anything is that the last 2 times BYU has come into Albertson Stadium, they've walked out with a win. And while they took a picture of this one, they've done it before. And I'll say this about that. If it upset some folks that they took a picture because they were so excited, because they'd lost 4 in a row, or because it was the last time they were at the Blue, I would say that it is a complete sign of respect. It's like Alabama. Without Alabama, teams aren't going to be rushing the field. And without Boise State having such a, at one time, pristine record on the blue turf, teams aren't going to celebrate the way that they have or do when they beat Boise State here in Albertson Stadium. I think the BYU win had as much to do with their celebration, had as much to do with the fact that they lost their last 4 and they were backs against the wall against a statistically rejuvenated team, and they heard all the noise, et cetera, et cetera. They weren't supposed to win, and they came out and they really should have won that football game, and they did. So they had a great day and they celebrated it. And without Boise State having that kind of reputation, there's nothing to celebrate. So the game itself, I'm not going to say you can just forget it, because they got out schemed at times. They had better personnel at times. I'd still say that what you got out of Taylon Green as your quarterback with 2 touchdowns, 220 passing yards, a high percentage of his completions. If you'd have told me that he could do that, 5 weeks ago, I'd say, no way, take it. I mean, take it. So his progression is tremendous. This was just a close game that they lost. This is no longer the football team, in my opinion, or program that we should all point at and say they should win this and they should win that, based on a perception that was created years ago. Now, I looked it up and I thought, okay, where is Boise State football at? Why do we have this sort of feeling about their losses? And some people will go real dark and firing coaches, or they suck, or it's not the same, and yada, yada, yada. I said, well, what is the feeling? A lot of people, 5 years is too long for a memory, right? But if you go back and look at that time period and compare it to the 5 years previous, you find out that from 2013 to 17, and 2013 was a dark year for Boise State and Coach Pete, his last season, and then a pretty good season and start for Brian Harsin. But 2013 through 17 in Albertson Stadium, Boise State only lost 3 times in 5 years. It's pretty good. From 2018 to where we sit today, Boise State's lost 7 home games. They've lost 4 home games in the last 2 years. So if these sting a little bit more because of you can't put your finger on it, you start looking for reasons to blame for those losses, it's because you've experienced a lot of it. And those blame items that you've chosen in the past have not ultimately been corrected, because they're losing additional games that you're not conditioned to paying money and tailgating and going down to see. Additionally, I took a look at, the new normal. And in these last 5 years, you've had embarrassing losses. They had not had previous. The San Jose States, the Nevadas, the Air Forces at times. Even UTEP was a very embarrassing loss. You had other kinds of losses where it was the type of Boise State football can't win the big one anymore loss, which for fans who have watched Boise State football for 25 years or more, they take those pretty personal. They've lost to Oklahoma State twice. They've lost to San Diego State twice, Fresno, BYU twice, Washington and Vegas, San Jose State for a championship, Central Florida on the road, Oregon State on the road. Those were the kinds of games that, had they won, you could wave that flag in these last series in 5 years. And it's not necessarily occurring when you lose these types of games, and you lose them in the recent past. The huge wins in the last 5 years, you've won on the road at BYU when you weren't supposed to, at Fresno when you weren't supposed to. And I think the flagship win was probably at Florida State, which was the shot heard around the country that give everybody that surge of old school Boise State Nation airport awareness pride. When somebody looked at you when you were in Grand Rapids, Michigan, saw your Boise State hat and said, man, that's a hell of a program. You guys are unreal. I stay up late to watch every one of those games. And those are the kinds of wins that produce those kinds of results. It hasn't helped. They haven't been and won a bowl game. They haven't won a bowl game since that Oregon game in Las Vegas in 2017. The record in the last 5 years is 40-13. I think that there's just a lot of really holding on to the past for the disgruntled folks. I think they have really been beating teams that aren't ranked without quarterbacks. And they've got 3 coming up that are very similar. Nevada, Wyoming, and Utah State are 12-15 combined. Wyoming is the best of the 3. This whole narrative, as some people like to put it, that they still have a lot of football ahead of them is true. They can still attain their goals. That's true. But I want to acknowledge the folks who are still smarting over embarrassing losses. The fans who were there, through the rough times in the 80s and can't handle any more of these big game type losses that used to come and give them that swell of pride and bother them. They miss the Florida State wins or beating Pete at home in Albertson Stadium. They miss that, long for that, and only can be disappointed if that doesn't occur. Well, these last 3 games before they go to a Mountain West Championship game, potentially, and or a bowl game, potentially, aren't going to produce that result if that's what you're looking for. So I think this new normal is where the program's going to have to transition, and I think fans have to do it on their own. We have to transition on our own. Leaders of the program, be it the head football coach, the athletic director, or Dr. Trump, who I don't hear from anymore, period, really publicly, they're not going to be able to get away with saying we need to lower our expectations and take pleasure in something lower than what we used to achieve. That's a very difficult sell. So I admire and understand their position, and these growing pains that the fan base is going through, fairly inevitable for any mature college football program, which Boise State, in terms of years of service, is a very immature program in terms of years of service. So there's a long way to go here. And, you could have a tremendous rematch with Fresno State in the championship game. You're going to have a great game with Wyoming on the road. The best win for Wyoming, though, is Air Force. They're 6-3. So there'll be a percentage of the fans that just say, so what? You went into Wyoming and beat them. They're 6-3. Their best win's Air Force. That you're not going to sway those people until you get the next time around to slay some dragon. None of these 3 teams that you play are ranked. I doubt Fresno would be ranked, and they're the odds-on favorite to me to come out and play in Albertson Stadium against Boise State. Because, Boise State, if they beat Nevada, Wyoming could lose a game. I think Wyoming has a tough game. They've got they still have Fresno, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, and they've got to go there. So there's a lot of there may be some wiggle room for Boise State, but when they get to Fresno, you've got Haener back, and Haener now is healthy, and he's thrown for 725 yards and 7 touchdowns his last 2 weeks. So it'll be a different game. I don't know if this sways where you're at with the program, but I would say that the next time you're around somebody who writes them off, who says they can't play, the coach sucks, the team's not got the same talent, they're nowhere near what they used to be. What is? There's now national speculation with people who are in high-profile positions at ESPN. Paul Feinbaum saying the Saban era is probably over. Okay, so that guy's going to take all kinds of heat. Well, he's out there saying that about Nick Saban in Alabama, where they're at. So it's not exclusive to Boise State. Everybody goes through this at some point. And I think we're in the midst of that. This was a big name-only opponent. This was a team that wasn't even at 500. So there's a lot of things to reshuffle. Credit to the fans, though, that still show up, make noise, and make that program look great. When I watch this game on tape, they make Boise State, Boise, Idaho, Albertson Stadium, and the people that follow Bronco football look real good. So I think that's all real positive. But it's going to take some time. We can X and O it to death. I think they just had better personnel that performed better, and they had better athletes, specifically one that they couldn't stop. I mean, how many catches did Nakua have? He had 14 catches. That's just a coach saying, let's keep throwing it to him. send him deep, and then we'll run screens behind him and other schemes, and they can't stop it. And once they found that, that's pretty much what happened for Boise State's defense. I thought they still played well at times. There was all the positive things. But for those who are in the disgruntled, all those losses I've talked about, the big wins that haven't happened, the embarrassing ones that have, it's going to take time. I will get back to you this week as early as possible with a breakdown on a very resilient Nevada team who I think is much better. I won't come out with one of these ridiculous BYU predictions. Thanks for joining me on the Kingdom of Pod. I'll talk to you later this week.